welcome. Bruchim Abbaim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. Here we have Katrin, your virtual rebbitzin. The virtual rabbi's cat is missing today. We'll see if he makes a surprise appearance at some point. And before we jump into our last two flavors of the mumpets, I think, for the day drinking part of this, right now, the best way, if you want to be able to support this channel and make sure we continue doing this, right now, go down, like this video. More importantly, if you're not subscribed to this YouTube channel, please click the subscribe button. It makes all the difference in the world. It's seriously what helps us to grow bigger than we are right now. And with that, welcome to Day Drinking with the Rabbi and Rebbitzin.
Yep. So today we continue with the Mumpets smoothie liqueur.
Yeah. Hipster liqueur from Berlin.
Liquor from Berlin, and today's flavor is mango and ginger.
Been looking forward to this one. Yeah.
Really?
By the way, we don't have any sponsors. We just, discovered these. So I'm not sure we'd take a sponsor if we got one, but I don't know, try us.
Well, I mean, as I pointed out already, it has, or I just repeated, we have like 6 different flavors, and this is number 5.
All with Weimar Republic important, interesting people on it. Many of them Jews.
Yes.
Yes.
I think all of them.
All of them Jews. Do you think the people who make the liquor actually know that they're Jews?
Sure.
Okay, there it is. Amen. See, the thing about these that's hard to describe, they all have, the two flavors are absolutely distinct, but still blend. There is a smoothie aspect. The alcohol hits hard after about 3 seconds. And they're pretty strong in how they come across, but they still have a smoothie aspect to them. They're incredibly, incredibly refreshing. And considering it's now very clearly winter here in northern Germany, it feels a little bit strange. But that being said, it reminds us of beach days to come next year. So... All right, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, today's podcast is about your video that you posted this week. No, last week.
Last week.
Last week.
Before Shabbat, yes.
About tribalism. And I just wanted to kind of as the first question, I wanted to ask you if you could, because you talk not just about tribes, but you also talk about dogma. And I wanted to ask you if you could briefly make a comparison or point out what are the differences between what dogma is and what tribal belonging to a tribe is, or tribal behavior.
So the Venn diagram definitely there's an overlap. So a tribe it's a group belonging or an energetic belonging. And I know it's, we just went through this on the Kabbalah class that I taught, that it's hard to have some of these discussions without using words that are deliberately vague and less meaningful. So by energetic, I'm not trying to be new agey here. I'm trying to say something that we give our energy to. We have a certain amount of effort that we can give in the course of a day, and our tribe is going to get a large part of that. So energy is as good a word as I can get. So we're going to have a relationship with a group, energetic, physical belonging in some sort of way. Whereas dogma, it's not just a set of beliefs, because beliefs can come in many different forms. It is and this, I don't want to get into a deep discussion on epistemology, but dogmatic beliefs are, I think the clearest way to say them, something that are non-falsifiable. So if you are engaged in a dogma, then someone comes up to you and says, you believe this, you're wrong. They can't make an argument. There's nothing that they can say to convince you that your point is anything other than correct. That's a dogma. If you are able to be in discussion, if you have the ability to say, oh, that's a good point, it's not a dogma. Or at least you are not, some people find that dogmatic, but at least you are not engaging in a dogmatic aspect. And once again, much like what the video is trying to say, that we are all members of tribes without necessarily believing that it's a tribe. It's the same sort of thing. If we actually engage in dogma, and we're not engaging in dogma as part of a formal religion, we're not going to call it dogma. We're going to call it good sense, or I have better information than you. And unless we're dealing with something like 2 + 2 = 4, then it's going to fall into the area of there's another opinion. And if we get to the idea of, yeah, but anyone who has another opinion to that, and it gets really tricky really, really quickly, because the Earth is 4 billion years old, and there's enough information to be able to make that case and look at it. But someone who's a young Earth creationist, for example, that's a dogma, and the dogma is that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. And if someone believes in that, then none of the information that I can give them, none of the sources I can point to, none of the, one of the first things a young Earth creationist will say is, well, carbon dating doesn't go back that far, and so how can you use carbon dating in order to tell that the Earth is 4 billion years old? And if you have no information on science, then you sit there and say, oh, wow, yeah, how do I do that? And the information is there are roughly 33 different radioactive dating technologies or methodologies. And when something is dated like a very old rock, then you use more than one methodology in order to get a definitive date. And so you enter with dogma really quickly into what we call the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is you believe you know a lot more than you actually do. And that's why you can have dogmas based around political ideologies and political ideas, for example. And even if the political ideas are based on someone who wrote a scientific paper, whether it's good or not, or whether it's acceptable or not, the person who wrote the scientific paper has a different level of knowledge than we do. So if we are an adherent to that person who wrote that thing, and we're saying that is truth, we're engaging in Dunning-Kruger. And just to finish up on this point, how do you know that you're in a dogma? Well, number one, that no matter what someone says to you, that thing that you believe in is non-falsifiable. That's a dogma, okay? And how do you know if you are, how's a good test to see if you're involved in that? Well, to see if you're in Dunning-Kruger, the classic test for this is to ask someone if they know how a toilet works. Mm-hmm. And then, generally speaking, someone says, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 means you know how it works, 1 means you have no idea. People are going to say 7, 8, 9, 10, because it's an everyday sort of thing. We all have an idea. And then you say, okay, take out a piece of paper and a pencil, and do you have the ability to draw the mechanism of a toilet, a flush toilet, in such a way that someone who doesn't know what a flush toilet is can try to reproduce that or understand it? And then, after that can't be done by most people, you say, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you know how a toilet works? Then the answer goes down. And it's one of the few ways that someone who is engaged in some sort of cognitive bias, that they, and essentially dogma is a type of cognitive bias. It's the only way is by going through that series of events. It's why deprogramming people from a cult is such a complex thing. It's why it almost never happens. It can happen, by the way. Just a shout out there, look at, was it Michelle Phelps? I can't think of her first name, and I'm so sorry in this moment, but one of the granddaughters of the founder of Westboro Baptist Church, who is no longer a member of the church, and she found her way out by engaging in a multi-year Twitter Q&A with a Jewish man, very liberal gay Jewish man, who simply said, I'm curious where your ideas come from. And over the course of time, putting her in a position of talking through in that level of, can I draw the toilet mechanism detail, she actually realized that her beliefs did not add up. Instead of arguing with her, asking questions so that she would continuously challenge herself, and then she started asking questions. It's the only way to deprogram someone. It's, again, why, even though we're on social media, and we need social media to survive, this BeitVirtuali, at the same time, I decry so much of social media, because social media is completely built around these cognitive biases. You will only find information on Facebook from people who already believe the same dang thing that you do. And so you're never in a situation to have that conversation. First of all, if someone says, I disagree with you, then it's a shouting match with no actual give and take. So the tribal belonging is the group that holds the dogma. And that's the tricky part. You can be a part of a tribe that is a non-dogmatic tribe. And to some extent, Judaism was built to be that. And the reason there are people who are very dogmatic within their Judaism within Orthodoxy, conservatism, reform, and all the variations. Mm-hmm. Dogma isn't just one aspect of Judaism or one stream of Judaism. But the difference between Judaism and Christianity, for example, which is a dogmatic sort of religion. Christianity has a credo. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, etc., etc. So the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed. Whereas Judaism doesn't have a creed. You don't have to believe basically anything to be a Jew. The act of being a member of the tribe is based on conversion or based on birth, whereas the act of being a Christian is an act of belief. And so if you believe you're a Christian, if you believe that you're a Christian, you believe in the divinity of Jesus, etc., you're a Christian. If you believe you're a Jew, but you didn't convert to Judaism and you are not of a Jewish mother, or in some streams of Judaism, a Jewish father, you're not a Jew. No matter how much you claim to be a Jew, no matter how much you want to be a Jew, it's not based on belief, it's based on something else. So it's based on a pure tribal belonging in a very ancient sense, which really makes a lot of people mad, but that's a discussion for a different day. So you can be a member of a tribe. Certain relatives of mine are members of Star Trek Club. Now, are there dogmas within that? Yes, there are some people who say you have to be a Trekkie and some that you have to be a Trekker. That's dogmatic if it gets to the point of you are not an authentic fan of Star Trek if you don't use the same word that I do. That's how dogma can manifest. Or the best Star Trek is fill in the blank. I don't think we want to get unlikes by filling. No. So you oftentimes tribes will then coalesce around dogmas, but you can have a tribe that is non-dogmatic. I think that tribes make it easier to be a part of a dogma.
You can have a tribe that is undogmatic.
Yes.
Yeah, but as I said, it's like, or as I just realized, it's really difficult, as you pointed, as you talked about dogma, and in the video you talked also about politics, like you are a part of one tribe in politics, and if someone posts something about the other tribe, or from another perspective of political view, there's like really a big overlap with the dogma, because a lot, especially I think through social media, it just became this thing that people are very dogmatic in their political views and don't allow other perspectives or negotiation and whatnot. Yeah. Well,
it's so we are tribal because we evolved to be tribal, and I realize that there are very intelligent human beings that will kind of disagree with the basic premise of religion, for example, which is one of the most clear crossovers between a tribal and a dogmatic system. That religion is endemic. And so, for example, people like Richard Dawkins, which would disagree, and I pick on Richard Dawkins a lot. He's a brilliant man who's written brilliant information. I just think when he talks about religion, he doesn't, especially Judaism, he doesn't really have a clue what he's talking about. But Michael Shermer, another person who I've actually seen in person and, would disagree with me on that, and that we are going to, if we're not born into a religion, we're going to find a religion. And people are very disturbed by those terms, because I say the word religion and you see a cathedral or a mosque, or if I say Judaism, again you see the black hat or the payas or something like that, and you don't see the word as that combination of tribal and dogmatic beliefs put together, and then the resulting rituals and culture and all that comes with that. And so that there are very intelligent people who are way more well regarded than I am who say that religion's not endemic. But I'll take pretty much anyone that you can give me, and if you can give me about 5 minutes of honesty with them, I'll find their tribes. And the reason it's maybe a little bit more complicated now is in our evolutionary process. If you go back 50,000 years and just take probably my ancestors, I've got a tiny bit of Neanderthal DNA in me, apparently, according to 23andMe, which doesn't surprise you at all, does it? But if you look back at what a tribal and a belief group, how that functioned for the vast majority of our evolutionary period, our family was our tribe, and the family was a part of the unit that lived together, which was also a tribe, and they subscribed to a way of life which included what was given reverence to, which spirits were given reverence to, or which ceremonies were evoked in order to bring about that the rains would come, or that the bear would stay away from the cave, or whatever the case would be. And so everything was congruent, right? Your parents were part of the tribe, so the tribe meant everything that you would logically have loyalty to. Clearly your family group, clearly the extended family group, clearly the people who worked together to survive the winters in southern France. All those groups were part of the tribe. And so one of the reasons that this gets really complicated now is we say tribe, and if we say toxic tribalism, then we're talking about, again, the other group with whom we disagree. Which is, I think, the problem to begin with. If we say you're a member of a toxic tribe, the person saying that's probably a member of a toxic tribe as well, but mine's right and yours wrong, so therefore you're toxic and I'm not, and that's part of the problem. But the issue today is my parents might not be a part of my religion because we've got much more flexibility in what we do. We've got much more of a quasi-consumerist society when it comes to religion. You know, it used to be generations ago that you were a member of the church or synagogue or temple, or that you were born into, and now there's a lot more shopping around. And within American Judaism, which I know a lot more about than maybe American Christianity, but within American Judaism, for years, in the last generation or so, why do you go to a shul is usually answered by the things that shul offers, which is a radically different answer than, well, that's the shul my parents went to and I was bar bat mitzvahed in. So, you know, you might be in a different tribal group in religion from your parents because that shopping around also can become shopping around for religion. We have that sense, and we talked a lot about conversion, and we talked that some people do convert for the sake of searching around for their spiritual path. That would have been unheard of at this level at some point in the past. So you can end up in a different tribal group than your parents. Then you can end up in within a religion, and then within that religion you can have various breakups in the tribe, again based on doctrinal differences, and that's as old as time could be. But then you can also be a member of a political group or a political activist, and your political tribe may or may not match with your family or with your religion or your lack of religion, and that political group will then have entry belief requirements. And I say political, that can be a single issue sort of thing, whether it's environmental or whether it has to do with COVID or, you know, any of those things that are passionate on both sides. In order to be a part of a specific political group, there are going to be certain tribal signalings that are shown. What clothing do I wear? Well, that's how a mask functions. A mask should be something that functions as part of a scientific discussion, but now it's actually a tribal sort. How do you know which tribe you belong in? Because you wear a certain bit of clothing or you don't wear a certain bit of clothing. And that's why something that was part of a health measure has now become a tribal element of belief. And that's why it gets so confusing. But we don't call it that yet. At the same time, if you are a mask wearer and you see someone not wearing a mask, do you not get upset? Do you not feel that they are wrong? And that word wrong, does it not even, again, go to the level of they are bad or even they are evil? That's tribal belief. And the same direction.
But if I think they are evil, then it's dogmatic, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I mean,
yeah. If you are part of a tribe that says, you know, we should be following every bit of new information that comes out as the process of science works its way through this, not the body of knowledge, because that's one definition of science. Science is primarily the process by which we challenge hypotheses and prove them right or wrong, which means that we're constantly going to be having more information. So if we are part of a tribal group that says we should follow the evolving consensus because that's going to happen within science, then that has less chance of being dogmatic than if we say scientist X says this or anti-scientist Y says this. I believe that, and any new information that comes in, I've already made up my mind. That's dogma. The first one where, you know what, I'm going to keep on reading the information as it comes in. I'm going to evaluate the information. I'm going to not assume that just because I'm passionate about my beliefs that I'm absolutely correct. It's tricky and it's brutal because this is now, I mean, people are losing friends. People are losing family over this.
Yes, so what I hear from what you're saying, and also what you said in the video, I would summarize it as you are very much against dogma, but I was wondering, is every dogma wrong?
Yes. If you freeze a belief and make it unassailable. If you take and again, I'm not talking about the Earth being 4 billion years old. The dogma would be the Earth is exactly 4 billion years old, and if it's 1 second more or less than that, then you're an evil person. Okay, so that's less likely to happen in someone who's saying that the Earth is roughly 4 billion years old. But if someone says the Earth is 10,000 years old, first of all, that flies in the face of all evidence, and all evidence that's likely to appear based on new scientific information, which is going to refine that date and talk more about, well, okay, how did abiogenesis actually take place, and look at the mechanisms of evolution and that sort of thing. So I'm not, again, talking about those things that are part of scientific debate as the process goes to figure out more on how the various different pieces fit together in something that is generally agreed upon, but yet is still part of an ongoing evolution consensus sort of thing. So that's why I try to make that difference between 4 billion years versus 10,000 years. That's not a debate. That's not a debate. That's a debate between why one would believe one thing and why one would engage in scientific inquiry. That's the only debate that's there. But the person's and maybe that turns out to be a dogmatic debate at that point. But the person saying the Earth is 4,000 years old is not being dogmatic. The person saying the Earth is 10,000 years old is being dogmatic. And yeah, it's tough, because if I were to make a political claim based on a scientific paper that happened at one point in time, or one person's scientific opinion, when there are others that I haven't heard that are maybe differing to that. If that's the case, then I can make dogma out of a moment of science really quickly. And so it's a tough discussion to have, because the thing that seems unassailable, because then quickly say, well, mine's not dogma, mine's based on science. And then that's where it gets really, really tricky. And so I would say that science itself does not make the claim to say that this is a frozen truth, and that's how you know. Science itself, and this annoys the heck out of me, the people posting about what does the science say, is an absolutely nonsensical statement. The science doesn't say anything. The science is a process by which we can get new information, the best information that we can act on until that information is proven wrong or more correct, or is refined. So the science is, what does the science say? The science says that we're going to keep on challenging ourselves. And so if someone says, well, based on the science, I'm never changing my mind on this, okay, that is dangerous, because science has changed a lot of things, or refined a lot of things. The process has challenged us to think of things in a different way. I was literally listening to a program today on it's a BBC documentary, which, for my friends in the UK, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it was actually challenging the popular conception of the post-Roman Empire settlement of England being an Anglo-Saxon invasion, and then that became the basis of what 2 centuries later would become England. And an argument that I'd never heard before. I mean, that was kind of an article of faith in British history, from what I understand. My British friends and our British friends who are watching this, is that what you learned? Is that, I mean, that's what I always learned. That's what I always understood. And what I found out is there's essentially zero archaeological evidence of conquest of Anglo-Saxons. There is artwork, there are burial grounds that are showing different groups of people coming in. There's various debates on what the genetics are saying about it. There's linguistic evidence. Fantastic, fascinating program. But it basically says this article of faith on this is the mystical founding of England is absolutely open to debate. And if you build your ego around, well, gall darn it, we came from Anglo-Saxon conquerors in the 7th century, then you won't hear the evidence that there's maybe some questions to be had. Now, that's not life or death, but sometimes it does become life or death. So is dogma ever correct? No. If you ever, in anything, freeze yourself to say, I am not going to allow myself in any way, shape, or form to take in new information regarding this thing, whether it be Judaism, whether it be the nature of God, whether it be the nature of a virus, whether it be the nature of a hairstyle, whatever the case may be, or how old the Earth is and how long it took and why it took and the formation of that and everything that is included in that incredibly complex cosmology. Anything that we freeze ourselves in, then we have stopped the process of advancement, whether it's personal or societal advancement. Dogma is the absolute antipathy. It is the antithesis, it is the antithesis to what allows us to progress.
But what if I feel comfortable?
Yeah, well, it's actually now you're engaging and preaching to my dogmas. There's a very famous person once said, "Death to all fanatics." Yeah, the only thing I'm dogmatic about is that we shouldn't be dogmatic. Yeah, we engage in dogmas because oftentimes it's painful to come to decisions, or it's painful to find ourselves in a group where we feel like we belong. I mean, let's just go back to why religions are so powerful. Religions in the past have been so powerful because they allow people who know nothing about each other to get along. How did I know 3,000 years ago that as I'm living in a tent in the highlands, in the Judean highlands, how did I know that person coming over the ridge was safe? And I knew because on their four-cornered garment, they had tassels on it. Tribal behavior, what clothing we wear. How did other tribes know? Because they had certain shapes tattooed onto their faces that you could recognize from a distance to know that, oh, they are not only a member of the tribe, but they are a tribal leader or a tribal shaman, or they come from a family that had, whatever the case may be, or they're a trader, or they're a storyteller, or any of those groups that I might allow in, even if they're not part of my tribe. This isn't me making stuff up. This is anthropological studies and that pretty universal across tribes. How we speak, what we do to our body, the clothing we wear, and then of course our songs and how we eat, our foods, all that sort of thing are all tied into it. But I need to know if I've got 60 people living with me, I know all about them, right? Language, one of the great theories of how language developed is based on gossip, so that we knew who was trustworthy and not, who was a good partner and who was not. Seems to make some sense, although Judaism says you should never gossip no matter what. So that's, as we all know within Judaism, that's a battle that's been lost over and over and over again. But, we know within our own tribal unit, we know if we grow up and we spend our entire lives around 60 to 150 people, we know who's trustworthy. We know who's not. We know who has violent temper tantrums. We know who doesn't. That person coming over the mountain, I need to know how to deal with them. Do I go get my sword, or do I open up my hands and embrace them? And so how did we do that? We tied ourselves to a grand narrative. And the grand narrative came through many different media. I'm going to talk all about it in my book coming out in the next few months, Gateways into Judaism. But that was what was so powerful about the grand narrative. And here we hit the 20th century, and postmodernism absolutely destroyed the grand narrative. This is what Nietzsche predicted. The God is dead of Nietzsche. People keep on saying, well, Nietzsche was the great atheist. No, Nietzsche actually was not happy about that. Nietzsche said, God is dead, science has killed God, but there's a problem because human beings, unless they overcome their localized, petty, and non-functioning moralities. Hitler so completely misused that, misunderstood what he was saying. Hitler's Übermensch, his Superman, was not what Nietzsche was saying. Nietzsche was saying we live within belief systems and narratives because we need those in order to give a sense to our life. Then over the course of 200 years with, the science of religion, we learned that, we didn't necessarily have a bearded dude in the sky give us tablets, that it was a naturalistic process over time. And so that and deconstructing the text through postmodernism destroyed all these things. But yet we're still the same people living in the cave 60,000 years ago. So we're still going to find a religion. But the problem is we're not calling it that anymore. No. We're still going to find ourselves very comfortably within a dogma. Why? Because it's comfortable. If I wake up in the morning and I say I have to question everything, that's a hell of a lot more stressful than waking up in the morning and say, I have a pretty good sense of what the world means. And there's a little bit of picking and choosing that needs to go on there. If I say I have no dogmas, well, there are certain things that I'm going to kind of rely that are going to be tomorrow like they were today. They might not be, and Judaism deals with that as well. We kind of rely that this house is going to be standing tomorrow. Hopefully it will, but it might not be. And that's the brutal part of it. But I can't wake up tomorrow saying, oh my God, is the house going to fall down today? I still have to function. So there are certain truths that I am going to, that maybe is not a truth, but there are certain things that I have to make true to me, even if it's not a universal truth, in order to function. But I should be conscious about that. I should be conscious that that's a choice. But then if I go to a doctor to talk about health issues that I'm having, I should be in dialogue that they are a human being as well, who has a higher expertise in that area than I do, and that I probably am going to trust them unless I have a reason not to, or unless that I have an expertise that they don't have. If I go to a therapist or a psychologist, I'm going to be a hell of a lot harder person to deal with because I essentially know what's going on, and they'd better be better at it than I am. So, there are certain things that we kind of have to, in order to have a sense of comfort, we have to get along with. But, if we grew up from every single day of our life being told that the sky is tan color, and that gives us comfort because, oh, great, sky is tan, and then one day someone comes up to you and says, no, the sky is blue. First of all, we've had a great disservice done to us by our tribe, whichever one person to billions of people who have taught us that the sky is tan, and that's a bit of an issue. Number two, do we have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to let this house of cards of my ego fall so that I can accept this new information? And obviously I'm being absurd with this one point, but that's exactly how it is. The process of someone leaving a dogma takes years, and I don't care if it is it's a short amount of time with an awful lot of trauma. And watch anyone who says, I used to be a, and I don't care if that's a Jew, Christian, Muslim, atheist, political left, political right, I used to be a, and then watch their conversion story away from that. And then also watch for the second part and look what tribe they've reformed themselves around that they haven't said is actually a tribe.
So your argument is that we are always part of a tribe or part of several tribes.
Yeah.
And we need to be part of a tribe at least?
So you have to go back again to the cave and say, what purpose evolutionarily did the tribe provide? And that was safety and security. Mm-hmm. So then the question is, in the year 2021, do we need safety and security? And the answer is
so?
yes.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about safety and security, what are we talking about? Well, maybe it's a little less so in 2021 that my tribe provides me physical security. Mm-hmm. Although before we get too high and mighty on that one, 4 weeks before I left my last job as a congregational rabbi in England, as I was pulling out of the parking lot, two boys on bikes came by and mimicked the shape of a gun coming out and pointing at the car and shooting at the car. I have had death threats in synagogues, and thank goodness that the tribal police, or in the case of the one place, the island police, were able to show up and be there. So, that is a part of a national tribe, is to have some sort of system of laws and those who can enforce the laws. And see, that enters into a debate right there, because you're going to have a very strong emotional reaction of the police are incredibly important versus the police need to be completely rethought or partially rethought. And both those things are then tribal beliefs as well. So, do tribes provide physical security? Well, in Great Britain, we had CRT, which was the Community Response Team. CST, Community Security Team. Thank you very much. Which was then hooked in with Scotland Yard. And I thank goodness every day of my life that I was in the synagogue that was the case. That we had people who were volunteers walking around between the synagogues, that when I, who was a known rabbi, my second week living in Leeds, England, I had 5 people in a car drive by and walking by in my kippah and swear at me and say, go back to Israel. And that was my welcome to England. So, good times. And each of those times, I then found out that I could then call the CST and report that, and then they would actually keep databases and look at that and actually try to deal with that. And I felt very protected by having a process as well as those cameras. And I never thought that I would say those things. I worked for a synagogue in Germany in 2012 to 14 that had a bullet hole in the windows, and the windows were bulletproof glass. So, tribes providing security, that tribe had security because they actually had guards that would protect the synagogue from getting in. Now, what's the dark side of that? The security aspect. People who should have gotten in were not let in because they didn't fit whatever norms the security guards had. So there's always, anytime we make a decision, there's always going to be a tribal decision around security or around safety. There's always a give or take. And that's where the debate comes in, is finding that balance. I, as a rabbi at that German synagogue, wanted more people to be welcome in because I wanted to see that synagogue grow. Security, as they pointed out to me many times, they were there to protect my life. I was a little bit younger then and thought that was a little bit absurd, but that bullet hole was sitting right there, and, it was what it was. So do tribes still provide safety? Yes, they very much can. Security? Well, that's more specifically security, but safety, that's kind of a mental aspect. And you talked about comfort. If I wake up every day and I have a sense of what the world means and my place in it, I'm going to be a happier person than if I wake up every day and say, I don't know who I am, where I belong. And so when people say, I don't know to whom I belong, I don't really know what I believe, I don't really know what my place is, oftentimes that's a great deal of anxiety. And what people will then search for is a group to whom they can feel that they belong. So is the tribe still providing safety at an incredibly deep level? Yes. And so that sounds like a good thing, unless the price is too high. And if the price is, okay, we will absolutely welcome you in, but you're going to believe this thing that is completely irrational, it's completely nonsensical. But if you don't agree with this, we're going to send you out into the cold again. And if that sounds harsh, just if you're starting to ask the questions on how tribe functions with you, again, try to say something to members of your tribe that goes against the common wisdom and see if they say, oh, that's a good debating point. Or if they say, you're a bad person in one way or another. And the thing is, we don't want our tribe, who's making us feel safe and secure, to say, you're a bad person. So what are we going to say? You know what? Yeah, you're right. I don't believe that. I'm sorry I said that. And it's really quick process to move from I have questions to, you know what? Exactly what the tribe says, I agree. Why? Because that safety and security of feeling like we belong is powerful, and we need that. And when we feel like we don't belong and we don't have that safety and security, well, other than the very few people who are true hermits out there who do not need to be around other people, and you and I think that we're hermits, but we, first of all, we have this family unit, which keeps us sane, and we keep each other sane because we do disagree with each other on a decent basis, but we also have our extended tribes, and we do exist in interaction with them. I let my dad, if you're watching, thank you. I let my dad spend over an hour telling me how I need to deal with renovating a wall the other day. That is definitely giving up my sense of who I am to an authority figure in my tribe, my dad. And I had to suppress my hermit ego a little bit in order to realize that I needed to reach out for help. And so, there's absolutely a benefit. Even if you think that you can exist by yourself, the answer is we seldom do. And yeah, other than those few hermits who can live on top of the mountain. By the way, that hermit living on top of the mountain, throughout most of history, they were supplied by the tribe. So I would even, the offerings that were made, the plates of food that were brought by the people on their pilgrimages and that sort of thing. So even the idea that a hermit doesn't need a tribe is also absurd in a pretty profound way. Anthropology, some of the ideas within anthropology talk about people in shamanic cultures, the shamans going and on trials on being alone, which would make sense to look at the stars and the various different things would happen. But you would still come back to the tribe.
Right. I mean, a shaman would also provide something.
Yes.
For or to the tribe. So
They
he needed the connection. Otherwise, he would not necessarily be a shaman.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and a shaman might stand apart from a tribe from a status standpoint, but regardless of that, she is still going to be completely bound to certain tribal rules, even if she has more power than some people in making those tribal rules. So the illusion of being outside of a tribe, and if anyone who's watching this is saying, I just don't feel like I'm part of a tribe, it's really worth challenging yourself. I mean, if you feel truly alone, there's no one to whom you answer. And the person I was talking about earlier this week, as I tried to break it down, my first tribe is the circle sitting in this room right now. And how do I know that that is tribal? Because there are certain things that I will not do without input or dialogue with you. And that's just it. Now, if I said, well, that's not true, I can do anything I want, then I'm still going to put myself in a position of having to deal with the difficulties in the relationship should I choose to not do it, which means that whether I like it or not, we're still in dialogue. So anyone who's out there, I just say how it is in my family and that's going to be followed. No, that's not true. We still have consequences, and those consequences are part of the dialogue. And as long as we are a part of the consequences and the fallout, sleeping in the doghouse or on the couch or, whatever the case may be, then we're still dealing with a family tribal unit, whether we like it or not. So anyone who's saying I'm not part of a tribe, it's probably because you're really uncomfortable right now and you don't want to call that thing that you're in a tribe, because it's not a tribe. You just have better information than I do. So it's not a tribe. You're just right. Guess what? That's a tribe, and that's a dogma.
You also already mentioned the like leaving the tribe, for instance, for the purpose of conversion or because of conversion.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, because we, if we talk about Judaism, if we, you have the honor thy mother and father, and I guess I guess it's also relevant in Christianity.
Yep.
So, so if you leave your tribe, how does this relate to this commandment? Is this the right? Do you say commandment?
I think we can call that one a commandment. That one specifically, utterance.
Utterance. Yeah, that was the word. Yeah. I mean, somehow, if you, I guess the stereotypical tribe is like your family, and let's say what your mom tells you you have to do, and if you don't do it, then what is the consequence, and how does it relate to honor your mother and father then?
Well, you're even within
a Jewish perspective.
Sure, I mean, even within Judaism, you're going to so the old joke, one Torah, two rabbis, three opinions. I think it's 17 opinions actually within the two rabbis. Even within Judaism, you've got multiple takes on what that actually means. And one of the more common ones is this is really about the full life cycle to, part of honoring father and mother is to making sure that that the roles are reversed at the right time, so that they have given care. So when it's time for us to give care, so they bring us into the world, and then at some point there's neutrality, and then there's a switch around at some point where all of a sudden we're to give care and then help take them out of the world. Hopefully not through a hit person, but rather through as they reach that time to pass, that then we make sure that the burials are with dignity and the remembering them, their legacy is done with dignity. And don't forget that within Jewish law, a lot of that also has to do with proper passing on of property, proper use of legacy, and that sort of thing. So it's also making sure that the financial and property legacy of the families is correctly dispersed among the family. All those sorts of things are part of it. So, anytime that we're dealing with Jewish law, we have evolved to see these things as deeply spiritual, but Jewish law at its first level, in the time of the temple, when the 10 utterances would have been crystallized into the form that we see today, those were utterances that were meant to help us understand our place in everyday life within the temple state that was forming, and then within the family. So the first 5 utterances are Ben Adam V'Makom, so between humankind and the eternal. And the second 5, the thou shalt not steal and murder stuff, those are Ben Adam L'Chavaro, so between humankind and humankind's fellow. And so the entire idea is this is a distillation of how we keep cohesion at a religious level, so that we have consistency in between king, prophet, priest, temple, sacrificial process. It's 1 through 5. And if you're trying to get along with each other, that's going to certainly help. Again, back to that idea of the person comes to my tents and I see them wearing tassels, fringes on their garments from a distance. Okay, great. That's the group of 150 people in the tents. Now we're to cities in the 7th century, and now we've got, the population of Jerusalem in 1000 BCE was roughly 6,000 people. Not that big. 7th century, it's getting significantly bigger, especially when the droves of people from the northern kingdom, after the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom, came down. There was a population explosion. Not an explosion. We're talking, tens of thousands of people. We're not talking millions of people. But all of a sudden, okay, we need not just to recognize that those people coming from the north are wearing tzitzit, that they're wearing tassels in their garments, but also that we're essentially functioning within a similar state system. and the state included the temple. So it was very, very practical. The way that you settled grievances with your neighbor, which is part of how society functions, was to go to the priest, the temple, to make certain sacrifices. That's what the book of Leviticus is a ritualization of dealing with legal issues between you and God and legal issues between you and your neighbor, which is why it's in the book of Leviticus that we have love your neighbor as yourself and treat the stranger in your midst as yourself, love them as yourself because you were once strangers in Egypt. Those are statements of how to function in a civil society. And so when we get to questions like kaved avacha ve'amacha, honor your father and mother, this is also originally meant to be there within a system of functional temple government. And then it evolves. We get to no longer having a temple, and now it's within a Jewish city or a village, which was all over the entire Mediterranean and possibly spreading farther out than that at the time. And now we get to today, and those of us who are engaged in religious Judaism, it's also at a spiritual level. How can I honor that which my parents have taught me at the most elevated sort of level? And then, so this question of converting is coming in the 21st century. If anyone left Judaism 600 years ago, it would have been a radically different societal situation. Someone leaving Judaism today is relatively common, unfortunately. It's very, very common. And so if I were to leave Christianity, for example, and become a Jew, and Christians are also concerned with honor your father and mother, then the question is, well, am I dishonoring my father and mother to convert to Judaism? And the answer is, boy, is that complicated.
Yeah.
I mean, indeed, I wish I had a simple answer to that. It's every conversion candidate with whom I've ever worked who has living parents. I've always asked the question, how do your parents feel about that? And that's a question that is not always welcome. I don't care how my parents think about that. Well, you have to care what your parents think about that, because even if you don't have a relationship, you still have a tribal, energetic connection with them. Right. Even if you think you've, we either have the relationship because we have dialogue with our parents, or we have the relationship with our parents because we're acting against it, because we're deliberately rebelling. Very few people have that relationship where they've fully individuated, and there's neither and there's no sense of either acting because of or acting against. There's always some level. Individuation is an aspirational goal that very few people have actually ever reached. We all have mommy and daddy issues to some extent or another. So, when I say, how do your parents feel about it? And someone says, I have no relationship with my parents whatsoever, unless there are extenuating circumstances that deal with abuse or deal with leaving a cult, which I've dealt with several times, most of the time I'm going to take second and third thoughts and have a lot extra dialogue before I accept someone as a conversion candidate, because on the one hand, you've got the direct sort of thing. Do you understand the relationship with your parents and the fact that this will cause them emotional trauma if they themselves are religious? It's really easy when someone says, honest to goodness, my parents have no religion, no religious beliefs whatsoever. They could really care less. That's a much easier situation to deal with than my parents are independent Baptists who believe that the King James Bible is the inerrant word of God and think that you're going to hell if you use a New English translation of it. That's a much more risky proposition, and it needs to be dealt with sobriety and with a great deal of carefulness, which kind of is what the commandment is to begin with. Kaved amacha ve'avacha, honor your mother and father, and kaved in Hebrew is give weight to.
Yeah.
So does it mean blindly obey everything that your parents say? No. It means that recognize that, so the picture of relativity of Einstein, where you've got that stretched out flatness forever, and then how do you actually recognize gravity? Then a thing of mass will push it down further. So if you push a marble towards it, the thing with the greater mass the marble will then swirl around that one first. So if you actually create on the template of humanity this idea of what should be important, our relationship with our family is something that should go deeper into that plane. There should be a lot. Judaism says that's an important relationship. And if we say, well, it shouldn't be an important relationship, then Judaism is going to say, you're ignoring the fact that whether you think it should be important or not, it is important. Because whether our parents were the most amazing parents in the world or the most horrible parents in the world, who we are is deeply influenced by that wonderfulness or that horribleness, or the benoni, the in the middle, which is what most of us dealt with, is our parents did the best they could with the tools that they had. And that needs to be honored, not just because the parents are human beings, individuals, humans who we need to love as ourselves and treat in the most ethical way possible, but because if we don't honor it, we don't actually understand who we are and what influences us. And the amount of people that I've seen in my life who, I am nothing like my parents, and then you meet their parents like, nope, you're exactly like your parents. There are some people who truly have individuated and have those relationships. It's very rare. So this is a relationship that we are required to give weight to understand how much it influences us, whether we want to or not. Back to the conversion question. Honoring one's father and mother partially means questioning, am I converting to a different religion? Partly to get back at my parents. And that happens more often than you can possibly realize. And so if one will not admit that, that's not honoring one's father and mother. And I don't mean, again, honoring someone who I don't get along with or someone who is abusive. I mean honoring the weight with which a parental relationship manifests in the world, in our bodies, in our psyche.
Yeah, just as you said, it's about having a conscious understanding of the tribe and embracing it or whatnot.
I think after talking about parents, we probably need to go through the last moments at this point.
Okay, so yeah, probably because
it's a good caesur here, I think.
This is the doctor's liqueur, Magnus Hirschfeld.
Oh, very good.
Jewish doctor.
By the way, if you've never read anything about the Weimar Republic, it was a time of interesting craziness as that's
so
being
some medicine
as that's being poured. One of my composition teachers at Temple University played us a piece by a composer in the Weimar Republic and said, without telling us what it was, when do you think this was composed? We said 50s, 60s, when all the music was going crazy. And it was written in 1922. The Germans in the Weimar Republic were doing artistic things that no one else was doing.
Before you do the bracha, this is rhubarb and cardamom.
Okay, I've been waiting for this one. I hope we saved the best for last, because we actually went and bought a full-sized one of these, totally on faith. Can you believe I just used that word? Just rhubarb and cardamom sounded really, really good. By the way, the word for cardamom in Hebrew is what?
Don't know.
Hell.
Okay.
So
lovely.
Don't assume that if someone's telling you to go to hell that they're actually saying something bad. Maybe they just want you to have some cardamom in your life. Oh, that's spectacular.
Yeah,
it is very
really
medicinal,
good.
though, isn't it? But it is actually spectacular.
This is great.
Yeah. Rhubarb cardamom. Okay, that is worth the price of admittance right there.
Wow.
Price of admission. Wow. Very good.
Really
okay.
Nice. Yeah, so let's go back to the video.
Okay.
At some point in the video, you made the statement that Judaism was never in history monolithic. And that you could just, point or could prove it.
Stick a pin in any point in the timeline.
You could stick a pin in any time of the timeline. So I'm giving you a timeline, and you have to prove it.
You have to put the pin in it then.
The pin in the timeline. So let's say Moshe Rabbeinu's time.
Oh yeah, you're gonna put me right into that right away. Well, first of all, I'm not going to go too deep into the question on is Sinai historical or not. I'm going to be chatting a little bit about that, I think, in this week's video, maybe next week's video. Maybe it's next week's video. Anyway, the beginning of my book that I'm working on, trying to finish right now, deals with that specifically. So, you first... So what are we talking about? Are we talking about a literal event in time? Well, the narrative goes from a whole bunch of people leaving slavery that were descendants of the Hebrew slaves, but then at that time also the people who followed them out of Egypt. So even the narrative talks about two different groups, the Erev Rav, so the people coming out along with the Hebrew groups, and of course the Hebrew groups descendants of 12 tribes. So that alone should actually give us a sense that our tradition began with the concept of the 12 sons becoming the 12 tribes. 12 being a typological number, right? Whether there are 12 literal tribes or not is less important. The fact that when we hear the number 12, we should think of zodiac, 12 apostles, 12 disciples, 12 tribes of Israel. There were various different godlike figures in multiple traditions that had 12 disciples or 12 children, and that's because the 12 signs of the zodiac and astrology have been part of the formation of those narratives, even if that aspect is lost. We've got the Tower of Babel story and that sort of thing. But even if that part is lost, they're still part of the story. Just look at the Chagall windows at Hadassah Hospital and see the astrological signs associated with the tribes. Read chapter 49 and 50 of Genesis, and you will see most of the signs of the zodiac called out related to the tribe. Some of them very obvious. Judah, you are a leaping lion. So you've got a couple that are very, very obvious. But nonetheless, what's the purpose of astrology at that level? It's to show differences, is to show different aspects of personality or different aspects of manifestation or different archetypes that then appear among human groups. And so if you take that at a metaphorical level, the story of the 12 tribes coming together with the many others who were non-Hebrews, you already have the narrative itself saying that there just wasn't one group. And then right after, so you say Moshe Rabbeinu on Sinai. Well, as Moshe Rabbeinu was on Sinai, you had people shouting, saying, what are we doing here? So everyone had accepted in the narrative that they would follow this law. And then almost to begin with, the narrative says, well, they stopped wanting to do that and wanted to go back. They'd just heard, you shall not create a graven image. And then they went and created a graven image. Talk a lot about that because that's actually one of the most fascinating metaphorical stories in the Torah. But even at that point, there's not any sort of cohesion there. Now, if we remove it from the narrative, when we look archaeologically, if there would have been some sort of exodus, the traditional date is 1440 BCE, the time that there probably would have been some group that left Egypt and joined in with the native groups in Judah and Sumerian highlands would have been probably 1200-ish BCE. And so that puts us more into the time of the Judges. The book of Judges, one of my favorite books in the entire Torah. It plays a huge part in the book that I'm reading right now. The entire book of Judges carries with it all the tribes hated each other and fought and killed each other and only got along when another enemy came in, and then 3 or 4 of the tribes would band together. And if you want to see how crazy the different traditions of the different tribes were, you had Levites going in, and you had families buying a Levite to actually put on a choshen and be a priest in their shrine that then included an idol. So we don't read the book of Judges and really study. I think there's only one Haftarah that's from the book of Judges, if I'm not mistaken, and we're missing out on the sense of, well, how were things before we had a temple? There were a bunch of tribes who did things their own way. And the underlying trope of the book of Judges is, in those days, there was no king in Israel. People did as they wanted to. So time of Moshe Rabbeinu? Yeah, absolutely no monolithic idea of Judaism whatsoever, either in the narrative or in the archaeology.
So...
I'm sorry, this is fun. I'm getting excited because I've had more fun writing this book than anything I've ever written in my life. And I am walking on clouds as I'm writing it. And it's going to be out there. I'm going to get it out to you within the next 6 months. And I am just so excited to do this. And the stuff that I just talked about, that's the sort of stuff that's in the book.
So what about the time when the time of the Talmud? I mean, this is already kind of when was the Talmud written is like its own thing, but
sure, yeah. I mean, we've got the various different levels of the writing of the Talmud. We've got the Zugot, so that would be the various different debating houses from the beginning of the Second Temple time up through the Hasmonean times. Then you've got the Tanaim, which is the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, so the writing of the Mishnah. And then you've got the next 2 centuries, which is called the period of the Amorim. which would be the Mishnah moves over to Babylon, and then the major debates happen there, and then you've got period after that, like the Stamim or the Savarim, which would then be kind of anonymous voices continuing to do editing, and you've got essentially a closure of the Talmud by about 600. So we've got, the process of writing the Talmud is nearly a millennium. And during any of those times, you'd kind of have to stick the pin in. But, so just stick a pin in during the writing of the Mishnah. So the temple's gone. We're in the 2nd century. And proof right there is when we say the Mishnah, what do we mean? During the 2nd century, there were many Mishnahot being written. Every academy had their own Mishnah. So we call this period the Tanaitic time, the Tanaim. Who were the Tanaim? So a Tana, which my mom's name is Tana, by the way, so I just always love this. But the Tanaim, a Tana was the person, whenever we think we're clever, we should learn these things, who had the entire Mishnah of their school memorized top to bottom. Everything, every single word. That's volumes and volumes, folks. And so, couldn't look it up on the smartphone. So you'd go and you would say, Tana, what is the halacha of how many blasts of the shofar for Rosh Hashanah? And then the person would, I'm just imagining, would close their eyes and then would go into some level of a concentrating trance, and then would start, Rabbi so-and-so says, and continue through with the dialogue over time. So during that period of time, every single group was vying for having the best organized series of Mishnahot, the clearest, the ones that would deal with the most amount of questions and concerns. What questions and concerns? Judaism was a religion to deal with temple sacrificial priest king. The temple was gone. You couldn't visit Jerusalem anymore. There was no more high priest. There was no more king. So no more Judaism, but yet we still had Judaism. So what was the Mishnah? It was an attempt to recreate Judaism from the remnants of dialogue that had dialogue. Well, it's not monolithic, is it? From the remnants of dialogue that had been going on probably First Temple times, but definitely from the Babylonian exile. And that dialogue is captured in more and less effective ways. And eventually this one guy, Judah the Prince, Judah Hanasi, he came up with the definitive version. What does that mean? So go to 20 different synagogues on the high holidays, and which you can kind of do in the age of COVID. You can actually see them. So watch 20 different cantors sing Kol Nidre. One of those is going to strike you. One of those is going to seem like, oh my goodness, right? Because unless they're reading off of sheet music, cantorial music is something that you learn the general shape and then you kind of improvise. So why are those melodies written down? Because someone improvised so well that they did a version that everyone liked and they wrote down. It's exactly how it happened. So if you listen to those 20, there's going to be one that that's just better. Well, you know what? Sometimes they're just a better singer, or it's a more resonant version. So chances are more than just you are going to say that's the version, the definitive one. So eventually you're going to have more people say, well, this is the cantor that we want to listen to. And then that channel stays up because more people listen to that cantor. Well, Judah Hanasi, his academy created the best organization, the series of texts that seem to be the most effective. And so we have 1 minute of coalescing where everyone, which is probably not true, but where there's general consensus of the Mishnah is this, and then all the other Mishnahot, they became texts that were remembered and they appear within the Talmud. It's like, yes, but there's a Breita, so a text that didn't become Mishnah that we're going to bring in and be part of. So we still captured all these different discussions. So we say, well, maybe at that moment, the Mishnah of Judah Hanasi, that was absolutely, that was written in what was at that time then Palestine, because after the destruction of Jerusalem and then after the end of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, then the Roman Empire took Judea, which was the name of that part of the world up until 135 at the end of Bar Kokhba. Then to punish the Jews, the Roman Emperor named it for the Philistines, the ancient enemies of the Jews, and so that's where we get Palestine as the name. So it was Palestine in the end of the 2nd century. So the Mishnahot were written in Palestine, but the strongest Jewish communities were still in Babylon. Those were So those were communities that had been there since 586 BCE, since the destruction of the first temple. So no monolithic there, because the Mishnah of Judah Hanasi, Judah the Prince, finds its way to Babylon within the next couple of years. We actually know exactly what year it happened, which is really cool. I just can't quote it. It's something 170, 180, 190. I just don't have that date in my head right now. They get there, and the rabbis in the various different academies there said, wow, this is really cool, but we do it slightly differently. So you still had that community and that community. And at the same time, well, here we are celebrating how many years of Judaism in Germany?
1,700.
Okay, so during the period of writing the Mishnah and the Babylon and the Talmud, we had Jews in the year 321, probably already earlier with with Marcus Aurelius and these different groups pushing up into Germania. So there's already Jews up here. Do you think that they are following a Judaism of the Mishnah? And they would necessarily agree with that. So not only do we have the Babylonians disagreeing and adding their discussion, which is the Amoraic level of the Talmud, at the same time you have differing ideas, as the Talmud was then written in Palestine as well, what we call the Talmud Yerushalmi, and they contradict each other at times. And there's some things that are not at all in the Babylonian Talmud that are in the Jerusalem Talmud, like agricultural things. Jewish agricultural laws only function in or only supposed to be enforced within Eretz Israel, so there's no reason to have a discussion on agriculture in Babylon. So you've got those two groups building their own, and at the same time we've got Jewish community in Alexandria, you've got Jewish community in Asia Minor, you've got Jewish community in Rome, you've got Jewish communities pushing throughout the entire Roman Empire, and there's probably Jewish communities in Kush, there's probably Jewish communities moving now towards India, and they're not necessarily going to be agreeing with. So even at those times, you've got disparate cultural groups, linguistic groups moving across. And so, yeah, there's your the idea. Maybe there was a monolithic moment when everyone agreed on the Mishnah. Well, it wasn't everyone agreed. It was general consensus. And even then there was, okay, we still have to keep on talking about it because it's not complete enough to take in all of our other. And then even if that was the case, the very nature of the Mishnah is not consensus. The very nature of the Mishnah is asking a question and getting all the different contradictory opinions. And about half the time, then you say, well, the rabbis say, as kind of a, let's go ahead and wrap this up in a nice little bow. But it doesn't always say, and that's the end of the debate. It's roughly 50% of the time there's an end of the debate. And the other 50% of the time, Rabbi X says this, Rabbi Y says this, the wise ones say this. All right. That supports all the different traditions that are in the different shuls that we know of. So nothing monolithic there whatsoever. And if you want to hear more points where we can stick the pin in, then just ask the question or read my book when it comes out.
Yeah, exactly. So we're over an hour into the podcast. And
did that pretty much cover what we need to cover? That felt pretty complete.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So video this week is going to be part 2 of this Streams of Judaism. And this is going to be kind of trying to distill what really we mean by the differences between Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, Open Orthodox, Rational Orthodox, Partnership Minyanim, Reconstructionalist Renewal. How do we actually understand that outside of tribalism? In other words, most of us are members of our stream because we are tribal members into the stream. And again, that's not necessarily bad, but are we consciously tribal members of the stream? And we don't always, if someone says, what makes you a Reformed Jew? Sometimes that's clearly articulated. It's generally not very clearly articulated. If someone says, what makes you an Orthodox Jew? Oftentimes the answer to that is because Reformed Jews are wrong, which if you define yourself by what you're not, that's a pretty awful thing altogether there as well. So it's trying to break that down a little bit, but it's still within the context of the tribalism I've talked about, that the purpose of streams, I love that we've got different streams of Judaism. I love that we've got those choices. I love that we can have these aesthetic explorations. But once again, I've seen so many people say, this group of Jews is evil. Well, that's a tribal thing. And so let's get rid of that. We're 0.2% of the world population. We need to stop hating each other. As hard as it seems to be for us to do, we should probably, work on that a little bit. So being more conscious of the tribe. So that video is coming out this week. Where I'd really like to hear from you. So we stopped doing Friday evening videos because it looks like with shuls opening up, there wasn't a demand for it, which is perfectly fine. But I'm thinking of doing on Fridays a weekly Parshat HaShavua, but not if you don't want it. So if that's something that you think might be valuable, then let me know, please, in the comments down below, or send me an email. If I get a few responses on that one, then I'll start doing that in the next couple of weeks. And so that will give us podcast, weekly video, and Parshat Shavua. If I don't hear from you, I'm not doing Parshat Shavua. I actually do need to hear from you. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, after all this, and you've listened this long, I think we deserve a subscribe. And we've got another adult education coming up in January. So who, and why were the prophets? It's not the way you've seen the prophets taught before, I promise. So a little bit of breaking it down, a little bit of weirdness, because prophets are weirdness. Anyone who is a member of BeitVirtuali has access to that through February, and then after that it's going to be at higher tiers only. But just join, try it out, even at the lowest level. Try out the class. The last class was a lot of fun. So much interesting going on. We're actually going to have a 5th session of just Q&A on what happened in the class. So if you want to have that back and forth Q&A Zoom session, just even at the lowest level, join BeitVirtuali, give it a try. It keeps us in having interesting new liqueurs. It keeps the lights on. It keeps our cat fed. And it keeps me doing this and writing books and hopefully asking the hard questions and challenging us. So there it is. Thank you all very much, as always, for being a part of BeitVirtuali, for listening, for supporting us. And with that, we'll see you next time.
See you.